99% of you are not subscribed to the channel. At 1,000 subscribers, I will post a series of special stories. Subscribe now. The first sign of the invasion was a strange ripple in the sky, like the air itself was tearing apart. People across the world paused, looking up with a mixture of awe and confusion as the ripples grew wider, the fabric of the atmosphere stretching unnaturally. Then, with a deafening roar, the sky split open, revealing a massive armada of alien ships that dwarfed anything humanity had ever seen. The Zorathians had arrived. Their ships were monstrous, angular behemoths of metal and energy, bristling with weapons that gleamed ominously in the daylight. As the Zorathian fleet descended through the atmosphere, the world was plunged into shadow, the sheer size of the vessels blocking out the sun. Panic erupted in the streets as people scrambled for shelter, their fear palpable as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Within hours, the Zorathians had established a global siege. The world's militaries scrambled to mount a defense, but it was a futile effort. The Zorathians were centuries ahead of humanity in technology and warfare. Earth's most advanced fighter jets and missiles were swatted away like flies. Cities fell as the invaders unleashed a barrage of energy weapons, leveling entire blocks in seconds. Communication networks were disrupted, power grids were disabled, and the world descended into chaos. In the heart of this turmoil, a meeting of Earth's most powerful leaders was convened. Deep beneath the Earth's surface, in a bunker designed to withstand a nuclear blast, the United Earth Defense Force, UEDF Command Center, buzzed with activity. Generals, politicians, and scientists huddled around a holographic display of the Earth, where the spread of the invasion was being tracked in real time. "We're outmatched in every conceivable way," said General Harrison, his voice grim as he watched red markers, representing Zorathian forces, spread across the globe. "Our best pilots are being shot out of the sky before they even see the enemy. Our ground troops are overwhelmed. We need to consider alternatives." The room was thick with tension. The UEDF, Earth's last line of defense, had been decimated in the first wave of attacks. What remained were scattered units, pockets of resistance that were quickly being snuffed out by the relentless Zorathian advance. "We can't surrender," President Martinez of the North American Union said, her voice shaky but determined. "We know what happens to the worlds they conquer. Slavery, experiments, extinction. We can't let that happen." "We need a miracle," muttered a European Union representative, his voice barely above a whisper. The room fell silent as the weight of those words hung in the air. A miracle. Something beyond their capabilities. Something that could turn the tide against an enemy that seemed unstoppable. But where could they find such a miracle? It was then that General Harrison, a man known for his unconventional thinking, cleared his throat and spoke up. "We don't need a miracle," he said slowly, his eyes narrowing as an idea began to form in his mind. "We need to do something they won't expect, something completely outside the box." All eyes turned to him, hope flickering in the eyes of those gathered. "What are you proposing, General?" asked the head of UEDF operations. Harrison took a deep breath. "We send in a team, not our best, but our weakest soldiers, the ones who've been sidelined, overlooked. They'll infiltrate the Zorathian forces and sabotage them from within." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the room. "You want to send our weakest soldiers against an enemy we can't even touch?" one of the generals scoffed. "Exactly," Harrison replied, his voice steady. "The Zorathians have proven they can predict and counter our every move. They've studied our tactics, our weapons, our best soldiers. But they won't expect this. They won't see it coming. We use their overconfidence against them." The room was silent again, this time with a different kind of tension. Harrison's idea was bold, almost reckless. But as the leaders exchanged glances, they began to see the logic in his proposal. The Zorathians were overconfident, certain of their victory. They wouldn't expect a desperate, seemingly irrational move from a defeated enemy. "What would this team do?" asked President Martinez, her interest piqued. Harrison leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "They infiltrate the Zorathian mothership. Once inside, they sabotage their systems, disrupt communications, disable their weapons, cause chaos. If we can throw them off balance, even for a moment, it could give our remaining forces the chance to strike back. The room was filled with the sound of hurried discussions and murmurs of agreement. It was a long shot, but it was a plan, a chance to fight back, however slim that chance might be. "But who would we send?" another general asked. "These weakest soldiers, how do we know they're up to the task?" Harrison smiled, a grim expression that spoke of the dire circumstances they were in. "I've already got a list. They're not the best, but they're resourceful, and they've got nothing to lose. We'll brief them, equip them with what we have left, and send them in. It's risky, but it's better than doing nothing." The decision was made. Operation Trojan was greenlit, and the call went out to assemble the team. As the leaders finalized their plans, the world outside continued to crumble under the Zorathian assault. But now, there was a glimmer of hope. A small, fragile hope that rested on the shoulders of those least expected to carry it. The countdown began. The fate of Earth now lay in the hands of a group of misfits, the weakest of the weak. And as the skies darkened with the shadows of the Zorathian fleet, they prepared to embark on a mission that would determine the future of humanity. The underground UEDF base was a hive of frantic activity, with soldiers and technicians rushing to and fro, preparing for what was possibly humanity's last stand. Amidst the chaos, in a small, dimly lit briefing room, 4 individuals sat around a metal table, looking at each other with a mixture of curiosity and unease. They were an unlikely group, a collection of individuals who had been overlooked and underestimated by the very military they now served. At the head of the table stood General Harrison, his face lined with exhaustion, but his eyes sharp with determination. He looked over the assembled group, knowing that the fate of the world rested on their shoulders. "This is it," Harrison began, his voice gravelly from years of barking orders in battlefields across the globe. "You've all been selected for a mission that, frankly, no one else believes you can complete. But I do, because where others see weaknesses, I see potential." The room was silent, the gravity of the situation settling over the group like a heavy fog. Harrison began the introductions. "Private Jackson Morrow, codename Jinx." Harrison pointed to a young man with tousled brown hair and a pair of goggles perched atop his head. Jackson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He was a slender figure with a nervous energy that seemed to radiate from him. He had a reputation for being a brilliant tech specialist, but his career had been marred by a series of unfortunate mishaps. "You've got a gift, Jackson," Harrison continued. "Your inventions are ahead of their time, but you've had issues with control." Jackson winced, remembering the countless accidents, machines going haywire, weapon systems malfunctioning, all under his watch. His fellow soldiers had nicknamed him Jinx for a reason. Still, despite his track record, he knew technology better than anyone. And if this mission was going to rely on someone hacking into alien systems, Jackson was their best bet. "Next up, Corporal Ilara Flynn." Harrison's gaze shifted to a woman in her early 30s with sharp features and piercing blue eyes. She sat with her arms crossed, a defiant look on her face. Ilara had a reputation as a talented medic, but her unorthodox methods often clashed with the strict protocols of the military. Her superiors had labeled her a maverick, a loose cannon, but Harrison knew that in a situation like this, her unconventional approach might be exactly what they needed. "You've saved lives in ways most people wouldn't even think of," Harrison said, meeting her gaze. "I need you to do the same on this mission, and I need you to keep these people alive." Ilara gave a curt nod, her mind already racing through possible scenarios. She knew this mission would be unlike anything she'd ever faced, but she was ready to prove that her methods weren't just unconventional, they were effective. Sergeant Leo Cade, codename Loner. Harrison's eyes settled on a tall, lanky man who sat apart from the others, his posture tense. Leo was a sharpshooter, one of the best in his class, when he could keep his nerves in check. His anxiety had always been his downfall, causing him to freeze in critical moments. He had been sidelined after a mission went horribly wrong, his hesitation costing lives. But his aim was perfect, his precision unmatched. If he could conquer his demons, he'd be an invaluable asset. Leo, you're the best shot we've got, Harrison said, his tone softer. I need you to focus, to keep it together out there. This team is going to rely on you to cover them. Leo nodded, his jaw clenched. He knew the stakes were higher than ever, and he was determined not to let his fear get the best of him this time. And, finally, Private First Class Sasha Wu, codename Wildcard. Harrison gestured to a petite woman with short, spiky hair dyed a vivid purple. Sasha was lounging in her chair, a grin playing on her lips. She was known as a demolitions expert with a love for chaos, often operating on the edge of recklessness. Her unpredictability made her both dangerous and invaluable in situations where conventional tactics failed. She had been discharged more than once, only to be brought back because of her undeniable skill with explosives. Sasha, you're here because no one else can do what you do, Harrison said, a hint of admiration in his voice. But I need you to rein it in. Just enough to get this job done without blowing us all to hell. Sasha winked at him, her grin widening. No promises, General. Harrison sighed inwardly but couldn't help the small smile tugging at his lips. He needed her chaotic energy, but he also needed her to stay focused. The general straightened, his expression turning serious once more. Now here's the mission. The Zorathians have established their central command on a massive mothership currently hovering over the Pacific. It's the nerve center of their invasion. Take it out, and we cripple their entire operation on Earth. He activated a holographic display, showing a detailed 3D model of the Zorathian mothership. Your objective is to infiltrate this ship, access its core systems, and sabotage them. Jinx, you'll be responsible for hacking into their systems. Ilara, you'll provide medical support and deal with any biological challenges we might face. Loner, you're on Overwatch. Cover the team and take out any threats from a distance. Wildcard, you'll handle the explosives. We need to cause as much damage as possible once Jinx has done his work. The team absorbed the information in silence, the enormity of the task before them sinking in. Why us? Jinx finally asked, his voice shaky. Why not send in a real team? Harrison looked each of them in the eye. Because a real team would get caught. The Zorathians expect the best. They've studied our top soldiers, our tactics, but they won't expect you. You're the underdogs, the ones no one sees coming, and that's your greatest strength. The room was silent again, but this time it was filled with a sense of resolve. The team might have been the weakest in the eyes of the UEDF, but they were ready to prove their worth. Harrison glanced at his watch. Your shuttle leaves in 1 hour. Gear up, say your goodbyes, and meet at the hangar. Remember, the fate of humanity rests on your shoulders. No pressure. With that, Harrison gave a sharp salute, which the team returned, albeit somewhat hesitantly. As he left the room, the 4 soldiers sat in silence for a moment, processing what lay ahead. Jinx was the first to break the silence. I guess we should get ready. Ilara stood up, stretching her arms. We're going to need everything we've got. Let's make sure we're prepared. Loner silently nodded, his hands trembling slightly as he stood to follow. Sasha was the last to rise, her usual bravado tempered by the seriousness of the mission. As they walked out of the briefing room and into the bustling corridors of the UEDF base, they knew that the world outside was on the brink of destruction. They were the last, desperate hope of humanity. A group of misfits, thrown together by circumstance, with everything to prove and nothing to lose. They headed to the armory, where they would be equipped with the latest UEDF tech, stealth suits designed to mask their heat signatures, advanced weapons capable of piercing Zorathian armor, and a few of Jinx's experimental gadgets that, with any luck, wouldn't malfunction at a critical moment. Each member of the squad prepared in their own way. Jinx meticulously checked and rechecked his equipment, muttering to himself as he made adjustments. Ilara stocked her medical kit with a mix of standard supplies and a few of her own concoctions, just in case. Loner cleaned and assembled his sniper rifle, his hand steadying as he focused on the task at hand. Sasha, meanwhile, selected an array of explosives, her fingers twitching with anticipation. An hour later, they stood in the hangar, a sleek black shuttle waiting to take them to the mothership. The atmosphere was tense, but there was a shared sense of determination among the team. They weren't just fighting for their lives. They were fighting for everyone who had been dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated. As they boarded the shuttle, the hatch sealed shut behind them with a heavy thud, the finality of the sound echoing in the silence. The pilot, a seasoned UEDF officer who had volunteered for the mission, gave them a grim nod as the engines roared to life. The shuttle lifted off smoothly, rising out of the underground base and into the night sky. The earth below was bathed in an eerie red glow, the result of fires and destruction caused by the ongoing invasion. The Zorathian mothership loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the stars, pulsating with a strange, otherworldly energy. The squad members exchanged one last glance, each of them silently acknowledging the enormity of the task ahead. There would be no turning back now. As the shuttle approached the mothership, the lights inside dimmed, and a hushed silence fell over the team. The time for doubt was over. It was time to prove that even the weakest soldiers could make the difference between victory and defeat. Jinx, Ilara, Loner, and Sasha tightened their grips on their weapons and prepared to face the unknown, ready to do whatever it took to save their planet. The shuttle slipped through the Zorathian defenses like a shadow, its cloaking technology masking it from the prying eyes of the enemy. Inside, the Misfit squad was a bundle of nerves, each member dealing with the tension in their own way. The silence was punctuated only by the hum of the shuttle's engines and the soft beeping of the navigation systems as they neared the Zorathian mothership. Jackson Jinx Morrow was hunched over a small terminal, furiously typing away as he monitored the shuttle's stealth systems. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears. He knew that one wrong move, one error in the calculations, and the Zorathians would detect them. He could feel the weight of his team's expectations on his shoulders. If they failed, it would be his fault, but he couldn't afford to think like that, not now. Ilara Flynn, the team's medic, was sitting across from Jinx, her expression unreadable. She methodically checked her medical supplies, her mind already running through various scenarios they might face on the alien ship. Her fingers brushed against the vials of her homemade concoctions, serums and antidotes that she had brewed from a mix of human and alien biology. She wasn't sure if they would work on the Zorathians, but they were better than nothing. Her usual confidence was tempered by the knowledge that out there in the heart of the enemy's stronghold, the unexpected was the only thing she could count on. Leo Loner Cade sat with his rifle across his lap, his eyes closed as he took slow, measured breaths. He was trying to calm the storm inside his mind, to keep his anxiety from paralyzing him. The darkness behind his closed eyelids was safer, quieter than the chaos that awaited them. He knew that when the time came, his hands would need to be steady, his aim true. He couldn't afford to freeze, not again. His teammates were counting on him, and this time he wouldn't let them down. Sasha Wildcard Wu, however, was the picture of relaxed confidence. She lounged in her seat, a smirk on her lips, as she casually twirled a small, sleek device between her fingers. It was a custom explosive she'd designed just for this mission, a concentrated plasma charge capable of melting through Zorathian metal like butter. She thrived on chaos, on the thrill of unpredictability, and this mission was exactly the kind of high-stakes game she loved. To her, it was all one big gamble, and she was ready to play her hand. The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom, low and tense. "Approaching the target. Get ready." The team snapped to attention, securing their gear and mentally preparing themselves for what was to come. The shuttle shuddered slightly as it maneuvered into the docking bay of the Zorathian mothership. The cloaking field held, and the shuttle docked silently, unnoticed by the alien crew. The hatch hissed open, revealing a dimly lit corridor that stretched out into the heart of the ship. The walls were a strange, pulsating metal, alive with an eerie bioluminescence that cast long, shifting shadows. The air was thick with a faint, acrid smell that stung their nostrils. It was like nothing they had ever encountered before, a world entirely alien to their senses. Jinx was the first to step out, his eyes darting around as he activated his wrist-mounted scanner. The device beeped softly, feeding him a stream of data about the ship's layout and the energy signatures of nearby Zorathians. "We're clear," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the ship. The rest of the team followed, moving quickly but cautiously, their senses on high alert. The corridor stretched on, twisting and turning in a disorienting maze. The ship seemed to be alive, the walls throbbing with a pulse that matched the faint vibration beneath their feet. It was as if the ship itself was a living organism, reacting to their presence in subtle ways. Jinx led the way, his scanner guiding them through the labyrinth of corridors. The team moved in silence, each member hyper-aware of the dangers lurking around every corner. Every creak, every flicker of light set their nerves on edge, but they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that the fate of Earth rested on their success. After what felt like an eternity, they reached their first objective, a control room that housed the ship's internal security systems. Jinx set to work immediately, his fingers flying over the alien console as he bypassed the security protocols. The Zorathian technology was far more advanced than anything he had ever seen, but he had spent weeks studying what little intel they had. He was prepared for this challenge. The others fanned out, covering the entrances and watching for any signs of movement. Loner took up a position near the door, his rifle trained on the corridor. His anxiety was still there, gnawing at the edges of his mind, but the familiar weight of the rifle in his hands brought a sense of calm. He focused on his breathing, on the steady rhythm of his heart, blocking out everything else. Ilara moved to the far side of the room, examining the strange, organic-looking machinery. Her mind raced with possibilities, trying to make sense of the alien technology. She was already thinking ahead, planning for contingencies. Whatever they found deeper in the ship, she needed to be ready to adapt. Sasha couldn't resist tinkering with one of the alien devices, her fingers itching to see what made it tick. She had to restrain herself from setting off an explosive right then and there, knowing that they needed to maintain stealth for as long as possible. But she was ready, and the moment Jinx gave the signal, she would unleash chaos upon their enemies. Jinx finally cracked the last layer of encryption, and the security systems flickered and went offline. "We're in," he whispered, a hint of triumph in his voice. "I've disabled the internal sensors and cameras. They won't see us coming." "Good work," Ilara said, her voice calm and steady. "Let's move." They slipped out of the control room, the path ahead now clear of surveillance. Jinx continued to lead them deeper into the ship, following the map he had downloaded. Their next target was the power core, a massive reactor that provided energy to the entire mothership. If they could sabotage it, the resulting explosion would cripple the ship, if not destroy it outright. As they moved deeper into the ship, the corridors became narrower, the walls closing in around them. The atmosphere grew thicker, the acrid smell more pronounced. The ship felt more alive here, as if they were traveling through the veins of a giant creature. Strange organic tubes lined the walls, pulsing with an eerie light. It was unsettling, but the team pushed forward, their resolve unwavering. They encountered their first patrol just outside the power core, a group of Zorathian soldiers, their sleek insect-like armor glinting in the dim light. The aliens moved with a fluid grace, their movements perfectly synchronized. They were formidable opponents, and the squad knew they couldn't afford to engage in a direct fight. Loner took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest as he raised his rifle. His hands were steady, his aim true. He lined up his shot, targeting the lead Zorathian's exposed neck. For a moment, time seemed to slow, and all the noise in his head faded away. All that mattered was the target in his sights. He squeezed the trigger. The shot was silent, the bullet finding its mark with deadly precision. The Zorathian crumpled to the ground without a sound, its companions reacting a fraction of a second too late. Loner fired again, taking down a second soldier before the rest of the team moved in. Sasha sprang into action, tossing a small, spherical device down the corridor. It bounced once, twice, then exploded in a flash of blinding light. The remaining Zorathians staggered, disoriented, their armor's sensors overwhelmed by the burst of energy. Ilara moved in next, her knife flashing as she dispatched the nearest soldier with brutal efficiency. Jinx stayed back, using the confusion to tap into the Zorathian communications network, scrambling their signals to prevent them from calling for reinforcements. Within seconds, it was over. The Zorathians lay motionless on the ground, and the corridor was silent once more. Nice shooting, Sasha said, clapping Loner on the back. You didn't freeze up this time. Loner gave a small nod, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. He had done it. He had kept his fear in check and delivered when it mattered. But he knew this was just the beginning. They reached the entrance to the power core, a massive, heavily guarded door that pulsed with a strange greenish light. Jinx quickly got to work, bypassing the locks and disabling the alarms. His hands shook slightly as he worked, the pressure of the mission weighing heavily on him, but he forced himself to focus. He couldn't afford to make a mistake now. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing the power core chamber. It was a vast, cavernous space, dominated by a towering reactor that pulsed with raw energy. The walls were lined with intricate machinery, tubes and cables that snaked through the room like veins in a living organism. The air was thick with the hum of the reactor, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through their bones. "This is it," Jinx said, his voice barely audible over the hum. "If we can destabilize the reactor, it'll take out the entire ship." Sasha grinned, her fingers itching to set the charges. "Leave that to me." The team spread out, covering the entrances as Sasha planted the explosives around the reactor. She moved with practiced ease, her mind calculating the precise amount of explosives needed to trigger a chain reaction without vaporizing them all in the process. She set the final charge and stepped back, admiring her work. "All set," she said, giving Jinx a thumbs up. Jinx approached the reactor's control panel, his fingers flying over the alien interface as he initiated the overload sequence. The reactor responded with a low, ominous rumble, the energy levels spiking dangerously. He set a timer for the charges, giving them just enough time to escape before the reactor went critical. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the ship. The Zorathians had discovered their presence. Red lights flashed, and the hum of the reactor grew louder, more frantic. The team's comms crackled with static as Zorathian voices filled the air, barking orders and organizing a response. "We've got company," Ilara warned, her eyes scanning the entrances. "We need to move now," Jinx shouted, his voice strained as he finished setting the overload. The team sprinted towards the exit, their hearts pounding as they raced against the clock. The corridors echoed with the sound of their footsteps, the walls closing in around them as the ship seemed to come alive, reacting to the impending destruction. They rounded a corner and nearly ran straight into a squad of Zorathian soldiers. The aliens were ready this time, their weapons primed and aimed. Energy blasts crackled through the air, forcing the team to dive for cover. Loner slid into position, his rifle up and firing before he even had time to think. He took down 2 soldiers with quick, precise shots, but the rest returned fire, pinning the team down. "We're not going to make it if we stay here," Sasha shouted, her voice laced with frustration. Jinx glanced at the timer on his wrist. They had less than 2 minutes before the reactor went critical. "We have to push through." Ilara nodded, her eyes hard with determination. "Covering fire on 3. The team braced themselves, their weapons ready. 1, 2, 3. They surged forward as one, a coordinated burst of fire forcing the Zorathians to fall back. Loner picked off the stragglers, his anxiety forgotten in the heat of battle. Sasha lobbed a grenade, the explosion sending the remaining soldiers flying. They broke through the enemy line, sprinting towards the shuttle bay with the reactor's timer ticking down in their ears. The ship trembled violently as they ran, the reactor's overload reaching critical levels. The walls shook, the lights flickered, and strange organic substances began to seep from the cracks in the metal. It was as if the ship itself was beginning to fall apart. They reached the shuttle bay just as the alarms grew deafening. The shuttle was waiting for them, the pilot waving them in frantically. "Get in, get in!" The team piled into the shuttle, breathless and bruised, but alive. The hatch sealed shut behind them, and the pilot gunned the engines. The shuttle lurched forward, blasting out of the docking bay just as the reactor went critical. Behind them, the Zorathian mothership erupted in a blinding flash of light. The explosion tore through the ship, ripping it apart from the inside. The shockwave rocked the shuttle, but the pilot held steady, guiding them out of the blast zone and back into the safety of space. As the light faded, the team looked back at the mothership. It was a twisted, burning wreck, pieces of it falling towards the earth like fiery meteors. The Zorathian fleet, now leaderless and disorganized, began to scatter, Their invasion halted in its tracks. The team slumped in their seats, exhaustion washing over them. They had done it. Against all odds, they had completed their mission and struck a devastating blow to the enemy. Jinx let out a shaky breath, his hands still trembling from the adrenaline. "We did it," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Ilara smiled, a tired but genuine expression. "We did." Loner stared out at the wreckage, his mind finally quiet, the anxiety that had plagued him for so long replaced with a sense of peace. He had faced his fears and come out on the other side. Sasha leaned back, a satisfied grin on her face. "Hell of a ride." The shuttle soared through the stars, leaving the burning remnants of the Zorathian mothership behind. The team had succeeded where no one thought they could, proving that even the weakest soldiers could make the difference in the fight for Earth's survival. And as they sped towards home, the Earth below slowly coming into view, they knew that their battle was far from over. But for now, they had earned their victory, a victory that would be remembered for generations to come. The shuttle broke through the Earth's atmosphere, descending toward the UEDF base where their mission had begun. The once bustling command center was now eerily quiet, as the world outside braced itself for what they believed was the final, desperate stand against the Zorathians. But as the shuttle touched down and the hatch opened, the Misfit squad emerged, carrying with them the hope of an unexpected victory. General Harrison was waiting for them on the tarmac, his stern face softened by a rare smile. He watched as Jinx, Ilara, Loner, and Sasha stepped off the shuttle, their uniforms singed and torn, but their eyes bright with the knowledge that they had succeeded. The relief in the air was palpable, a silent acknowledgement that the impossible had been achieved. "You did it," Harrison said, his voice filled with a mixture of pride and disbelief. "You actually did it." Jinx, still a bit shaky from the adrenaline crash, managed a weak smile. "We had a few close calls, but yeah, we did." Ilara nodded, her usual calm demeanor barely concealing the exhaustion that threatened to overtake her. "The reactor's gone. The ship was tearing itself apart when we left." Loner, normally so quiet and reserved, spoke up, his voice stronger than it had been in months. "We took out their command, the rest of their fleet. It's falling apart." Sasha flashed her signature grin, though it was tempered by the gravity of their success. "Turns out blowing stuff up is the answer to all life's problems." Harrison chuckled, a rare sound that seemed to echo in the stillness of the base. "Get inside. There's a lot of people who need to hear what you have to say." The team followed Harrison into the command center, where the remaining members of the Earth's leadership were gathered, huddled around holographic displays showing the disarrayed Zorathian forces. The screens were alight with images of Zorathian ships losing power, crashing into the ocean, or drifting aimlessly in space. Without the mothership's command structure, the once unified invasion force was crumbling. As the squad entered, all eyes turned to them. There was a moment of silence, a collective pause as the gravity of what had just happened sank in. Then the room erupted in applause, the sound reverberating off the metal walls, as leaders and soldiers alike cheered for the unlikely heroes who had pulled off the impossible. President Martinez, who had been at the forefront of organizing Earth's defense, stepped forward, her expression a mix of awe and gratitude. "You've done more than just stop an invasion," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've given humanity hope. We owe you our lives, our future." Ilara, ever the pragmatist, shook her head. "We were just doing our job. But this isn't over yet. We've bought ourselves time, but there's still a lot of cleanup to do." Harrison nodded in agreement. The Zorathians aren't completely defeated, but without their command structure, they're vulnerable. We need to press the advantage, push them off our planet once and for all. The room buzzed with activity as plans were quickly made to coordinate the global counteroffensive. The UEDF's scattered forces would regroup, and with the Zorathians in disarray, they had a real chance to drive the invaders out of Earth's atmosphere entirely. But for the squad, their mission was done. They had completed what no one else could, and now it was up to the rest of humanity to finish the job. As the command center filled with the frenetic energy of renewed purpose, the team found themselves standing together, apart from the rest. A small island of calm in the sea of activity. They had forged a bond in the heat of battle, one that transcended the ranks and titles they had once held. "So what now?" Jinx asked, his voice laced with fatigue. Elara gave a small smile, the corners of her mouth twitching upward. "Now, we rest. We've earned it." Loner looked around at his teammates, the people who had stood by him when he had been at his lowest. "And then what?" Sasha shrugged, her usual bravado tempered by the knowledge of what they had just accomplished. "Who knows? Maybe they'll put us back in the field, or maybe we'll finally get that vacation I keep hearing about." Harrison approached them again, his expression serious. "Whatever happens next, know this. You've all proven that you're more than what anyone expected. You've shown the world, and the Zorathians, that the human spirit is indomitable, no matter the odds." The team nodded, the weight of Harrison's words settling over them. They had done what no one else could have imagined, but they knew that the fight was not yet over. The world was still in turmoil, and there would be much work to do in the days ahead. But for now, they allowed themselves a moment of quiet triumph. Later that evening, as the Earth's forces began their final push to reclaim their planet, the Misfit squad gathered outside the base, beneath a sky that was slowly returning to normal. The last remnants of the Zorathian fleet were visible as faint, distant streaks of light, disappearing into the dark void of space. Jinx sat on a crate, tinkering with one of his gadgets, though his heart wasn't in it. He finally set it aside, looking up at the stars. "Do you think they'll come back?" Elara leaned against a wall, her arms crossed. "Maybe, but we'll be ready if they do." Loner was lying on the ground, staring up at the sky. "We stopped them this time. That's what matters." Sasha kicked at a loose pebble, sending it skittering across the ground. "If they're smart, they'll stay far, far away. But if not, well, we'll just have to show them what happens when you mess with Earth." The group fell into a comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. They had been underestimated, written off as the weakest, but they had proven that strength wasn't just about physical power or skill. It was about resilience, determination, and the willingness to fight when everything seemed lost. As the night wore on, the lights of the UEDF base flickered on, casting long shadows across the ground. The world was beginning to heal, and the squad knew that their part in this story was coming to an end. But they also knew that they had forged something stronger than just a victory. They had created a legacy. Their story would be told for generations, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope could come from the most unexpected places. The invasion had begun with the world on the brink of despair, but it ended with humanity standing strong, thanks to a group of misfits who refused to back down. As they stood together under the stars, the squad felt a sense of peace. They had done their duty, and they had done it well. The world would go on, and so would they, ready for whatever came next.